There's a frame in Major Boobage, Season 12, Episode 3, aired March 26th, 2008, where Kenny McCormick is floating through a sky made entirely of flesh. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean the clouds are skin-toned. The mountains are shaped like breasts. And there's a woman riding some kind of giant cat through an atmosphere that looks like it was painted by someone who spent way too long staring at the cover of a heavy metal magazine. And the thing that stops me every single time I rewatch this frame isn't the absurdity of it, because absurdity is South Park's native language. It's the craftsmanship. The lines are smooth, the colors are rich, the motion is fluid, in a way that South Park almost never allows itself to be. For one surreal, gorgeous, completely deranged sequence, this show made out of digital construction paper cutouts decided to become something else entirely, something beautiful, in the most inappropriate way imaginable. And that frame, that single, lovingly rendered, anatomically ridiculous frame, is the key to understanding something about South Park that I think most people miss. This show doesn't just do trippy episodes. It does trippy episodes with a level of artistic ambition and thematic depth that sneaks past you precisely because you're too busy laughing at the surface insanity to notice what's actually happening underneath. So tonight, we're going deep. We're talking about the most trippy episodes South Park has ever produced. And I don't just mean the ones where characters get high, although there are plenty of those and we'll get to them. I mean the episodes where reality itself comes unglued, where the show's animation transforms, where the line between what's real and what's imagined gets so blurred that even the creators, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, admitted they got confused about what was supposed to be happening. We're talking about altered states of consciousness, broken fourth walls, visual experiments that no other show on television would dare attempt, and moments where a crude cartoon about 4 foul-mouthed kids in Colorado managed to make you question the nature of perception itself. If you're watching this late at night, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a while, and the rabbit hole goes deeper than you think. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Every subscriber genuinely matters to this channel. All right, let's do this. I want to start with a question that sounds simple, but isn't. What does trippy actually mean in the context of South Park? Because when you say trippy episode, to most people, they immediately think of drug episodes. Kenny huffing cat urine in Major Boobage. The boys chugging cough syrup in Quest for Ratings. Randy deliberately giving himself testicular cancer to score a medicinal marijuana card in Medicinal Fried Chicken. And yeah, those count. But South Park's relationship with altered perception goes way beyond substance use. This is a show that, across its 27 seasons and counting, has systematically explored every possible way that reality can be distorted, questioned, reframed, or completely shattered. Think about what this show has done. It's sent its characters into an entire dimension made of human imagination. It's revealed that Earth itself is an alien reality show. It's trapped Butters in a virtual reality loop so convoluted that the show's own creators couldn't keep track of which layer was real. It's taken a 10-year-old boy and literally rewired his perception so that everything, music, movies, food, his best friend's face, looked and sounded like feces. It's told an entire Christmas story through rhyming narration that turned out to be a satanic fever dream invented by a sociopath. And in every single one of these cases, the trippy element wasn't just there for laughs. It was doing something, saying something, pulling back a curtain on how we see the world, why we see it that way, and what happens when that mechanism breaks. And here's something I want to establish early, because it's going to matter throughout tonight's discussion. South Park's approach to visual experimentation is different from any other animated show because of the way the show is built. Most animated series, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, Rick and Morty, have a consistent visual identity that rarely changes. They might do the occasional stylistic parody, but the core look stays the same. South Park does this too, most of the time. But when it breaks its own visual rules, it breaks them harder and more completely than any other show. The show goes from the flattest, most primitive-looking animation on television to genuinely beautiful, technically complex sequences with zero transition. There's no gradual shift. There's no preparation. One frame is construction paper. The next frame is fluid anime or lush heavy metal painting, or live-action guinea pigs composited into cartoon environments. And that sudden, jarring contrast is itself a kind of perceptual shock. A visual trip that mirrors the thematic trips the episodes are exploring. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why this works so well, and I think it comes down to expectation. When you watch a prestige animated show, something with a high visual baseline, like Spider-Verse or Arcane, you expect beauty, you expect ambition. So when those shows do something visually stunning, it's impressive, but not surprising. Your expectations have been calibrated to that level. South Park operates with the lowest visual expectations of any major animated show. You expect crude, you expect flat, you expect simple. So when the show suddenly produces something gorgeous, the surprise factor is enormous. Your brain hasn't prepared for it. Your perceptual framework hasn't adjusted. And that surprise, that gap between expectation and experience, is precisely what a trip feels like. The world suddenly looks different from what you expected. Your assumptions about what this thing can be have been violated. And in that moment of violation, you're open to receiving ideas that you might have resisted if they'd arrived in a more expected package. So here's what we're actually exploring tonight. Not just which episodes are the weirdest, although we'll definitely cover that. We're peeling layers. We're starting with what's obvious, the surface level psychedelia, and then we're going deeper with each pass. By the time we're done, I think you'll see these episodes differently. I think you'll see this entire show differently. Because the trippiest thing about South Park's trippiest episodes isn't the visuals, or the drug references, or the reality-bending plots. It's that a show everyone dismisses as crude. Toilet Humor has been conducting one of the most sophisticated, sustained explorations of perception and reality in the history of American television, and nobody talks about it, until now. Okay, let's start where most people would start, with the most visually obvious example of South Park going psychedelic. Major Boobage, the episode I opened with. Season 12, Episode 3, written and directed by Trey Parker, originally airing on March 26, 2008. The premise is deceptively simple. There's a new drug craze sweeping South Park. Kids are getting high by huffing cat urine. They call it cheesing, because it's fun to do. And I need you to sit with that pun for a second, because it's the kind of joke that's so stupid it circles back around to being brilliant. Fondue, fun to do, with cheese. The cheese comes from cats. I mean, look, Trey Parker has said in interviews that some of his favorite jokes are the dumbest ones, the ones that make you groan before you laugh. And this is a perfect example. But the cheesing itself is just the delivery mechanism. The real trip is what happens to Kenny when he gets high. And this is where the episode becomes something genuinely special. Kenny's hallucinations are animated in the style of the 1981 film Heavy Metal, which, if you haven't seen it, was basically a feature-length animated rock opera full of science fiction, fantasy, violence, and an absolutely staggering amount of nudity. It was the kind of movie that was designed to be watched in an altered state, and it became a cult classic precisely because of how unabashedly it committed to being exactly what it was. And what South Park does with this reference is remarkable. They don't just throw in a quick visual gag, they fully commit. They create extended sequences of gorgeous, fluid, traditionally animated footage that looks absolutely nothing like South Park. Kenny soars through landscapes of breasts on the back of a giant cat. He battles monsters. He pursues a mysterious warrior woman through architecture that is, to put it delicately, entirely mammary themed. And here's the detail that blows my mind every time I think about it. According to the production notes on this episode, those heavy metal inspired sequences took 8 weeks to complete. 8 weeks. For context, a normal South Park episode is produced in 6 days. 6 days from concept to air. That's the show's entire identity. The legendary production cycle documented in the 2011 documentary 6 Days to Air, where director Arthur Bradford followed Parker and Stone through the creation of a single episode and showed the world just how impossibly compressed their schedule is. They start on Thursday with nothing. By the following Wednesday morning, sometimes just hours before the episode airs, supervising producer Frank C. Agnone II is rushing the master tape to a satellite uplink facility to beam it to Comedy Central in New York. It's a process that would make most animators physically ill to contemplate. So when I tell you that the heavy metal sequences in Major Boobage took 8 weeks, 8 times the normal production cycle, I need you to understand what that means about how much Parker and Stone cared about getting these sequences right. They hired pornographic actress Lisa Daniels to perform as the warrior woman, filmed her in live action, and then converted the footage to animation through rotoscoping. They licensed 3 songs from the original heavy metal soundtrack: Heavy Metal, Takin' a Ride by Don Felder, Heavy Metal by Sammy Hagar, and Radar Rider by Riggs. They created an entirely separate animation pipeline for sequences that appear in maybe 8 minutes of a 22-minute episode, and the result is genuinely beautiful. I know that's a weird word to use about an animated sequence where the primary visual motif is breasts, but I stand by it. There's a fluidity and a care to the heavy metal sequences that reveals something important about how Parker and Stone think about animation. They choose to make South Park look crude. The construction paper aesthetic that started as a literal limitation, the original pilot, Cartman Gets an Anal Probe, was actually made with paper cutouts, photographed with a stop-motion camera, has been a deliberate artistic choice from the very second episode onward. Every episode after the pilot has been animated digitally, and since the early 2000s, the show has used Autodesk Maya, but the animation team goes to extraordinary lengths to make it look like it's still made of paper. Characters still move in that jerky, limited way. Backgrounds still have that flat, layered quality. And that means when the show breaks its own visual rules, when it suddenly becomes fluid and detailed and gorgeous, the contrast hits you like a punch. Major Boobage is doing something incredibly clever with that contrast. Kenny's trips are visually lush and beautiful, specifically because the rest of the episode is in standard South Park style. The crude, flat world of South Park is reality. The gorgeous, flowing world of the heavy metal hallucinations is the fantasy, the escape, the drug-induced delusion. And that visual language reinforces the episode's actual satirical point, which is about drug prohibition and its absurdity. And I want to dig into the animation a bit more, because I think the technical details reveal something about how South Park approaches its craft in ways that people don't always appreciate. The original heavy metal film was itself an experiment in animation styles. It featured work from multiple animation studios around the world, each contributing different segments in their own visual idiom. The film was a showcase for the diversity of animation as a medium. And when South Park recreates that style, it's not just paying homage. It's participating in a conversation about what animation can be. The construction paper style says animation is crude, simple, efficient. The heavy metal style says animation is lush, painterly, limitless. And by putting both styles in the same episode, Major Boobage argues that animation can be both simultaneously, that the limitations of one style don't negate the possibilities of another, that a show that looks like it was made by children on a kitchen table can also produce imagery of genuine beauty, and that the tension between those two registers is itself a source of meaning. This is something that I don't think enough people talk about when they discuss South Park's animation. The show's visual style isn't just a look, it's an argument. Every time South Park deliberately constrains itself to looking crude, it's making a choice to prioritize speed, directness, and satirical impact over visual sophistication. And every time it breaks that constraint, the anime in Good Times with Weapons, the heavy metal in Major Boobage, the live-action guinea pigs in the Pandemic episodes, the Cloverfield-style shaky cam. It's showing you what it could look like if it wanted to. It's revealing the gap between ability and choice. The show could look better. It chooses not to. And that choice is the foundation of everything else it does. See, while Kenny is tripping, the adults of South Park respond to the cheesing epidemic in exactly the way you'd expect. They panic. They ban cats. Gerald Broflovsky, Kyle's dad, a lawyer, drafts legislation making cat ownership illegal. The DEA confiscates all the town's cats. And in a subplot that is both hilarious and strangely touching, Cartman hides his cat, Mr. Kitty, in his attic and starts sheltering the neighborhood's cats, eventually maintaining a hidden colony of felines in a setup that directly parallels Anne Frank's diary. Cartman even suggests Mr. Kitty should write a diary. And this is where the episode's genius really shows. Because Cartman, the most selfish, the most cruel, the most utterly amoral character in South Park, is doing something genuinely compassionate. He's protecting cats, not for profit, not for manipulation, but because he loves his cat and can't bear to see cats suffer. It's one of those moments where the show reveals a crack of humanity in its most inhuman character, and it does it while also making a devastating argument about drug policy. Because here's the thing, Gerald, the guy who pushed to ban cats, turns out to be a former cheeser himself, he relapses. And by the end of the episode, he delivers a speech that is basically a direct argument for drug decriminalization, with cats standing in for drugs. Replace the word cats with drugs in Gerald's final monologue, and you have one of the most straightforward anti-prohibition arguments South Park has ever made. The point isn't that cheesing is good. The point is that banning the substance, or in this case the animal that produces it, doesn't solve anything. It just creates a black market, punishes innocent people and cats, and fails to address why people were getting high in the first place. And all of this, the satire, the character depth, the policy argument, is wrapped inside the most visually psychedelic episode South Park had ever produced at that point. The trippy visuals aren't decoration. They're the delivery system for the message, just like the cat urine is the delivery system for the high. Okay, I've been talking about major boobage for a while, and I could honestly keep going, but I want to pull back and look at the bigger picture, because major boobage is just one example of something South Park does again and again. It uses visual transformation, breaking its own aesthetic rules, as a way to explore altered states of consciousness. And the most ambitious example of this technique isn't major boobage, it's Good Times with Weapons. Season 8, Episode 1, aired March 17th, 2004, written by Trey Parker. And honestly, this might be the single most important episode in South Park's visual history. Here's why. The premise is simple. The boys go to the county fair and buy Japanese weapons from a vendor. Stan gets tonfas, Cartman gets sais, Kyle gets nunchakus, and Kenny gets a shuriken. They start playing ninjas, pretending to have special powers, and the episode's animation shifts. It doesn't just tweak, it transforms completely. The boys become muscular anime warriors. The backgrounds become dramatic, stylized, Japanese-inspired landscapes. The fight scenes are fluid, kinetic, and gorgeously rendered. The whole episode flips between two visual modes: the standard South Park paper cutout style, which represents reality, and a fully animated anime style, which represents how the boys imagine themselves. And this toggle between reality and imagination is doing something incredibly sophisticated. When Kenny throws a shuriken at Butters, who's playing his villainous alter ego Professor Chaos, the anime shows an epic, dramatic battle where a noble warrior defeats a powerful enemy. Then, the animation snaps back to reality, and we see Butters standing there with a real metal star embedded in his actual eye. And that snap, that instant transition from beautiful fantasy to ugly reality, is one of the most effective visual jokes South Park has ever done. It's also a deeply uncomfortable moment, because it forces you to confront the gap between how children see violence and what violence actually looks like. The thing that really makes this work, though, is how carefully the anime sequences are constructed. Each boy has a distinct ninja identity with specific powers. Stan becomes Shadow Hachi with fiery tonfas. Kyle is Bunraku, a compassionate ninja with powerful nunchakus. Cartman is Bullrog, a brute dedicated to eradicating hippies, armed with sais. And Kenny is Ninja Master Kenny, equally deadly, but always muffled. These aren't just throwaway designs. They're reflections of the boys' actual personalities filtered through the lens of anime fantasy. Stan is the brooding hero. Kyle is the moral compass. Cartman is the power-hungry strongman. Kenny is the silent weapon. The fantasy doesn't replace their identities. It amplifies them. It takes who they really are and dresses it up in the visual language of action and heroism. And then there's the fight with Craig's group, which features the epic Let's Fighting Love battle. Craig, Jimmy, Clyde, and Tolkien have also bought weapons and come looking for a fight. And the resulting clash is scored by one of the most gloriously stupid songs in South Park history. The anime animation goes full throttle here. Jump cuts, speed lines, dramatic poses, slow motion impacts. It's simultaneously a loving tribute to and a savage parody of anime fight sequences. And the fact that underneath all this visual spectacle, real children are hitting each other with real metal weapons. That tension between the fantasy of heroic combat and the reality of childhood violence never releases. It just builds and builds until Butters staggers off, bleeding, and the beauty collapses into guilt. The episode also features Let's Fighting Love, a parody of anime theme songs performed by Trey Parker entirely in Japanese. And Parker speaks Japanese fluently, which is a detail that a lot of people don't know about him. He's a genuine Japanophile. The song is deliberately written with bad grammar and nonsensical lyrics, parodying the way J-pop theme songs often sacrifice coherent meaning for energetic delivery. And there's a bilingual bonus hiding in the lyrics. The first verse is actually about the singer bragging about his genitalia, and the second verse is literally the singer pointing out how ridiculous the lyrics are. It's a joke that works on 3 different levels, depending on how much Japanese you understand. And here's a production detail that I find fascinating. In 2015, Parker and Stone listed Good Times with Weapons as their second favorite episode of the entire series. But, and this is the contradiction, in the DVD audio commentary for Season 8, they both openly admitted that they didn't think it was a very good episode. So which is it? And I think the answer is that it's both. The anime sequences are ambitious and visually stunning. The core story about kids hurting Butters and trying to cover it up is genuinely dark. The commentary about how American society is more offended by nudity than violence. Cartman streaks across a stage full of adults, and they're outraged, while Butters staggers onto the same stage with a metal star in his eye, and nobody cares, is sharp and true. But the episode was also produced during a period when Parker and Stone were simultaneously working on Team America, World Police, which was a grueling production that left them creatively and physically exhausted. So the episode exists in this weird space where it's both a masterpiece of visual experimentation and a product of creative burnout. And I think that tension is part of what makes it interesting. This is where I want to start going deeper, because so far, we've been talking about episodes where the visual style changes, where South Park literally becomes a different looking show to represent altered perception. And those are amazing. But the show's most profound exploration of trippiness isn't visual at all. It's conceptual. It's about what happens when reality itself turns out to be something other than what you thought it was. And the ultimate expression of this idea is Canceled. Season 7, Episode 1, or Episode 4 by production order, aired March 19th, 2003. This is the episode where the boys discover that Earth is a reality television show. Let me set this up properly, because the way the episode opens is one of my favorite structural gambits in the entire series. It begins with a scene that is almost shot for shot, line for line, identical to the very first South Park episode. Cartman gets an anal probe from 1997. Cartman arrives at the bus stop talking about a dream where he was abducted by aliens. The other boys mock him. Ike follows Kyle to school. Kyle kicks him. It's all the same, except the dialogue is slightly more profane, reflecting how the show has evolved. And when the boys realize that all of this has happened before, when they have deja vu inside the narrative, they do something completely unexpected. They acknowledge it. They recognize that they're stuck in a repeat. Think about what that means for a second. The characters are aware of their own narrative structure. They know that something has reset, and that awareness leads them down a path that ends with the revelation that all of Earth, every species, every conflict, every drama, has been engineered as content for alien entertainment. Life itself is a show. The alien who delivers this news, Najix, is one of the trippiest characters South Park has ever created. He first appears looking like Randy Marsh, explaining that he chose a familiar form to put the boys at ease, a direct parody of the movie Contact, which the boys immediately call out as a movie that sucked. So Najix shows his true form, which is a grotesque monster, and then cycles through a series of celebrity transformations. Frank Sinatra, George Burns, Michael Jordan, until Cartman suggests a giant taco that craps ice cream, which is what Najix becomes for the rest of the episode. And there's something deeply, philosophically unsettling about that moment, if you think about it. The alien's true form is incomprehensible. Every other form is a performance. And the form they settle on, a taco that defecates ice cream, is neither truth nor familiarity. It's absurdity. It's the only honest response to a reality that has just been revealed as manufactured. The episode aired on March 19th, 2003, the exact same day that the United States invaded Iraq. And it ends with an advertisement for Earth, the alien reality show, promising that in the next episode, the Americans and Iraqis have an all-out brawl. That timing wasn't accidental. Parker and Stone were making a point about how real human conflict is consumed as entertainment, how war becomes content, how the most catastrophic events in human history are packaged and broadcast for the amusement of an audience that can change the channel at any moment. And there's a meta layer here that I think is crucial. The alien producers, the Juzians, tell the boys that after 100 episodes, any show starts to decline in quality. And here's the thing. Canceled was originally intended to be the 100th episode of South Park. By production order, it was the 100th episode made. But a scheduling shuffle meant that I'm a Little Bit Country actually aired as the official 100th episode instead, and Canceled aired as the 97th. So the episode's central joke, aliens saying shows decline after 100 episodes, was designed to be the show's own 100th episode milestone, a self-referential jab at their own longevity. The timing got scrambled, but the intent was clear. Parker and Stone were using the show to question whether their own show had peaked, whether they were still making something worth watching, whether the whole enterprise was just content being generated for an audience that would eventually move on. It's the trippiest kind of self-awareness, a show questioning its own existence while its characters question the existence of reality. And the Juzians themselves are fascinating as a concept, even leaving aside the controversy around the character design. They're described as controlling all media in the universe. Their business model is simple. Find interesting planets, engineer conflict between diverse species, place together on those planets, film the results, broadcast them, and then cancel the show when ratings decline. Earth, in this framework, isn't a home. It's a set. Human history isn't progress. It's programming. Wars aren't geopolitical events. They're sweeps week. And every conflict you've ever cared about, every election, every movement, every revolution, was engineered for entertainment value by producers who will destroy the set when the numbers drop. That's a bleak vision. It's also, if you tilt your head slightly, a pretty accurate description of how cable news works. And the fact that the episode aired on the exact day the Iraq War began isn't just coincidence. It's the show deliberately synchronizing its fictional commentary with real-world events in a way that forces you to ask where the satire ends and the documentary begins. If Earth really is a reality show, then the invasion of Iraq was a season premiere. And that thought is uncomfortable enough to qualify as trippy all by itself. There's also a small detail in Canceled that I love and that I think most people miss. The scientist character who discovers Earth's true nature figures things out through a chain of free association. He uses word association, connecting one idea to the next through seemingly random links, to arrive at truths that rational analysis couldn't reach. It's a parody of Jeff Goldblum's character in Independence Day, but it's also, accidentally or not, a pretty good description of how Trey Parker writes. The 6-day production cycle is essentially a word association exercise. Start with an irritation, follow the thread, connect it to something seemingly unrelated, keep pulling. Eventually, you arrive at something that makes a weird kind of sense. The creative process, in other words, is the same kind of altered state that the episode is depicting, a dissolution of rational control that allows unexpected connections to emerge. And honestly, that kind of recursive self-examination is something South Park does better than almost any other show on television. Because when South Park gets trippy, it doesn't just ask, what if things look different? It asks, what if everything you think is real is actually constructed? What if your entire perception of the world is a mechanism designed to keep you entertained, or compliant, or blind? Which brings me to what I think is the single most underrated trippy episode in South Park history. And it's not one that most people would put on a trippiest episodes list, because it doesn't have psychedelic visuals, or drug hallucinations, or alien revelations. But in terms of what it does to your perception of the show itself, nothing else comes close. I'm talking about Woodland Critter Christmas, Season 8, Episode 14, the season finale, aired December 15th, 2004. If you've seen this episode, you already know why I'm bringing it up. If you haven't, and honestly, I kind of envy you, buckle in. This episode is a masterclass in perceptual manipulation, and it works because of how systematically it subverts every expectation you have about what you're watching. It opens like a children's Christmas special. There's rhyming narration in the style of Dr. Seuss or How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The animation shifts to a softer, warmer palette. Cute woodland animals, a squirrel, a rabbit, a raccoon, a bear, each with adorably repetitive names like Squirrely the Squirrel and Rabbity the Rabbit, are building a Christmas tree. Stan discovers them and helps them make a star. It's sweet. It's cozy. It's exactly the kind of wholesome holiday content you'd expect from a show that has always done Christmas episodes with genuine warmth. Then the animals reveal that one of them is pregnant with their savior. Stan helps build a manger. They ask him to kill a mountain lion that has been threatening the birth. Stan does, but discovers the lion was a mother with 3 orphaned cubs. And then, and I remember exactly where I was when I first watched this, because my jaw literally dropped. The woodland critters reveal that they are Satanists. Their savior is the Antichrist. They celebrate by sacrificing Rabbity, devouring his flesh, and having a blood orgy. And the narration continues in the same cheerful rhyming cadence. The animation stays warm and inviting. The critters still have their adorable squeaky voices. Nothing changes about the form, only the content changes. And that's what makes it so deeply, disturbingly trippy. Because the episode is deliberately exploiting the way your brain processes visual and tonal cues. You've been trained by decades of children's television to associate certain visual and narrative styles with safety, innocence, and warmth. Woodland Critter Christmas uses those associations against you. It wears the skin of a Christmas special while being, in content, one of the most disturbing things South Park has ever produced. Parker has talked about the production of this episode, and the story is almost as wild as the episode itself. They were coming off the production of Team America, World Police, which had overlapped with most of Season 8. The staff was completely depleted. They had no ideas. Parker has said that all they had was a little shred of an idea, which was John Denver Critter Christmas, but that's all we knew. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning, just 4 days before the episode was supposed to air, when someone suggested making the critters satanic. Parker recalled that the blood orgy concept was inspired by a scene from the 1997 science fiction horror film Event Horizon. And then, after finishing the episode, Parker said he drove home and roared like a lion upon realizing that not only had they completed the episode in time, but it might actually be good. And then the episode does something that elevates it from merely disturbing to genuinely brilliant. About 2/3 of the way through, the story cuts to Mr. Garrison's classroom, and we discover that everything we've been watching, the critters, the Antichrist, the blood orgy, all of it, is a Christmas story being read aloud by Eric Cartman for a school assignment. Kyle objects. Mr. Garrison tries to shut it down, but the other students beg to hear the ending, and Cartman continues. This reveal retroactively transforms the entire episode. You're not watching a South Park episode about Satan-worshipping animals. You're watching a South Park episode about Cartman imagining Satan-worshipping animals. And in the story, naturally, Kyle is the one who gets tied to a satanic altar and eventually allows the Antichrist to possess him. Because of course, that's what Cartman would write. The final line of Cartman's story is that everyone lived happily ever after, except for Kyle, who died of AIDS 2 weeks later, complete with an illustration of a hospitalized, AIDS-stricken Kyle. It's revenge fiction. It's a story about hatred, dressed up in the most innocent possible clothing. And it's a perfect illustration of how perception can be weaponized. How the same narrative format that's used to comfort children can be used to traumatize them, depending on who's controlling the story. And the thing that really gets me about the classroom reveal is the reaction of the other students. They want to hear the ending. They beg Kyle to let Cartman continue. They're invested in the story, despite, or maybe because of, its awfulness. And Kyle, who objects to everything Cartman is doing, who knows he's being mocked and victimized, reluctantly allows it to continue because the pressure of the audience is too strong. The story must be told. The narrative demands completion, and Kyle's pain is the price of the audience's entertainment. If that isn't a perfect metaphor for how shock value works in comedy, if that isn't a precise, surgical dissection of the relationship between performer, audience, and target, I don't know what is. And the fact that it's all framed within a Dr. Seuss-style rhyming narration just makes it more devastating. The form insists on innocence. The content is anything but. And the gap between those two things, the gap between how something looks and what it actually is the space where all of South Park's best work lives. I also want to mention that the woodland critters come back in the Imagination Land trilogy, which we'll talk about shortly. They appear on the evil side of Imagination Land, and they're among the most dangerous entities there. They kill Kurt Russell's entire military squad. The fact that characters from Cartman's Christmas story are real within Imagination Land raises an uncomfortable question. Does the act of imagining something make it real? And if Cartman imagined the woodland critters, and the woodland critters exist in Imagination Land, then isn't Cartman's mind one of the most dangerous places in the South Park universe? His hatred literally creates entities capable of murder. His imagination is weaponized, and every terrible story he tells adds more monsters to the realm of human creativity. That's a genuinely disturbing thought that the show never directly addresses, but that lingers in the background of every Cartman-centric episode after this point. Now, I want to connect this to something broader, because I think there's a thread running through all of these episodes that becomes visible when you look at them together. Major Boobage is about how substances alter your visual perception. Good Times with Weapons is about how imagination transforms your experience of reality. Cancelled is about how the framework of your entire existence might be artificial. Woodland Critter Christmas is about how narrative structure manipulates your emotional responses. Each of these episodes is attacking a different layer of the same question. How do we know what's real? And that question reaches its absolute peak in an episode that I think is the definitive Trippy South Park episode, even though it's rarely described that way. Grounded Vindaloop, Season 18, Episode 7, aired November 12th, 2014. Written and directed by Trey Parker, the 254th episode of the series overall. Okay, so here's the setup. Cartman tricks Butters into thinking he's wearing an Oculus Rift virtual reality headset. He puts a pair of goggles on Butters, connects to him via walkie-talkie, and convinces him that everything he's seeing, school, his house, the town of South Park, is a simulation. It starts as a standard Cartman messes with Butters episode, the kind they've done since Casa Bonita in Season 7. Butters is gullible. Cartman is cruel. We've seen this before, but then things go sideways. Butters, believing he's in a virtual world where actions have no real consequences, starts doing things he'd never do in reality. He punches his father Steven in the testicles. He steals a car. He tries to assault a prostitute and gets stabbed. The goggles come off, and he discovers that everything that just happened was, in fact, real. He's actually bleeding. That's disturbing enough. But the episode is just getting started. Because then Cartman starts receiving calls from a customer service representative named Steve, who tells him that actually, Cartman is the one in the virtual reality. And then Steve calls customer service and gets another version of himself on the line, who tells him that his reality is also virtual. And then that version calls customer service. And the layers keep multiplying, creating what Steve names a customer service Vindaloop, a portmanteau of Vindaloo and loop, where nobody can determine which layer is the actual base reality. And here's the part that honestly makes my head hurt in the best possible way. On the DVD commentary, Parker and Stone admitted that while writing the episode, particularly after the first act, they themselves became confused about which world was supposed to be the real one. The creators of the episode couldn't keep track of their own reality layers, and rather than seeing that as a problem, they leaned into it. The confusion became the point. Because the episode isn't really about virtual reality technology, it's about the impossibility of establishing an objective foundation for reality when every framework you use to verify reality could itself be part of the simulation. And the ending is perfect, just perfect. After all the layers of confusion, after reality has been questioned and re-questioned and questioned again, the episode cuts to live action footage. Real children, played by actors Sullivan Braun, Max Calvin, Kellen Michael, and Rowan Smith, are standing in a room dressed as Kyle, Kenny, Cartman, and Butters. They remove what appear to be VR headsets. They look around in confusion, and one of them says, essentially, that this must be the real world. The implication being that the animated South Park we've been watching for 18 seasons is itself a simulation. That the real versions of these characters are live-action children who've been playing a game this whole time. Now, obviously, South Park isn't going to canonically establish that it's been a virtual reality experience for its entire run. The live-action ending is a joke, but it's a joke that works because it taps into something genuinely unsettling. The idea that there's always another layer, that you can never actually reach the bottom, that the very concept of reality might be infinitely recursive. And the fact that this idea is being explored in a show about construction paper cutouts only makes it more effective, because South Park's entire visual identity is already a kind of managed illusion. It's a digital animation designed to look like paper. It's a simulation of crudeness. So when the show asks, What if none of this is real? It's asking a question it was uniquely designed to ask. And I think there's something really important about the way Grounded Vindaloop uses Butters as the central figure of its reality crisis. Butters is the show's most trusting character. He's the kid who believes whatever he's told. He's the one who followed Cartman's instructions to live in a bunker for weeks in Casa Bonita. He's the one who believed he was a vampire, who believed he had a disorder called multiple personality, who believed his parents when they told him he was grounded for reasons they couldn't even remember. Butters' defining trait is faith. Faith in authority, faith in his friends, faith in the basic coherence of the world around him. So when Cartman exploits that faith to convince Butters that reality is a simulation, it's not just a prank. It's a violation of something fundamental. It's an attack on the mechanism by which Butters navigates the world. And when Butters acts on his belief that nothing is real, when he punches his father, steals a car, tries to assault a prostitute, the episode is showing us what happens when faith in reality is destroyed. Not in an abstract philosophical sense, but in a concrete, immediate, visceral sense. Butters doesn't become free when he believes nothing is real. He becomes dangerous. He becomes unmoored. The absence of consequence doesn't liberate him. It damages him. And when he takes off the goggles and discovers that the blood is real, that the pain is real, that actions have consequences, regardless of what framework you've been operating in, that's not just a funny twist. That's a profound statement about the relationship between belief and behavior. I've been rewatching this episode a lot while putting this video together, and something struck me that I hadn't noticed before. The customer service representative, Steve, is stuck in his own kind of reality loop. He sits in a call center, answering phones, dealing with complaints, repeating the same scripts. And when Steve calls customer service from within the VR system, he gets another version of himself doing the same job. The loop isn't just affecting the characters in South Park, it's affecting everyone. The customer service workers, the consumers, the companies, the technology, everyone is trapped in a cycle of mediated experience where nobody can access unmediated reality because the mediation is the reality. And honestly, in 2014, when this episode aired, that felt like a clever satire. Now, in 2026, it feels like a documentary. I think about this every time I put on a headset or scroll through a feed. How many layers of mediation are between me and the actual world? How many filters are processing my experience before it reaches my consciousness? Am I seeing what's really there? Or am I seeing what an algorithm has decided I should see? Am I Butters with his goggles? Or am I Steve at his desk? Or am I the person watching Steve's version of Steve who's watching another version of Steve? At what point does the loop collapse? And if it doesn't, if there's always another layer, does it matter? South Park doesn't answer these questions, but it asks them better than almost anything else on television. And it asks them through a story about a kid in fake goggles who punches his dad in the testicles. That's the trick. That's always been the trick. Let me catch my breath for a second. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just a video about weird cartoon episodes. And I know I keep coming back to this point, but I think it's the key to understanding everything these episodes are doing. South Park's trippiest moments aren't just visual spectacles or narrative tricks. They're philosophical experiments conducted inside a format that most people don't take seriously. And that underestimation is exactly what gives them their power. Okay, let me take you somewhere different now, because so far, we've been talking about episodes where the trippiness is external, altered visuals, warped realities, narrative twists. But the most devastating trippy episode South Park ever made is one where the alteration is entirely internal. It happens inside a character's head, and it broke something in the show that has never fully healed. You're Getting Old, Season 15, Episode 7, aired June 8th, 2011, written and directed by Trey Parker. And I want to be honest with you, this episode makes me uncomfortable, not because it's offensive. South Park is offensive in almost every episode, and that's part of the deal. This one makes me uncomfortable because it's true. Here's what happens. Stan turns 10. Kyle gives him a CD of tween wave music for his birthday, a fictional genre that, to the viewer and to the adult characters, sounds like the noise of people defecating over drum beats. The parents ban the music. Randy, because he's Randy, tries to embrace it to feel young. Standard South Park setup so far. But that night, Stan listens to the confiscated music privately and discovers that it too sounds like excrement to him. And then everything else starts sounding like it too. Movies, ice cream, video games, his friends' voices. A doctor diagnoses him with being a cynical asshole. Everything looks and sounds like excrement because his perception has been fundamentally altered by the experience of growing up. And I need you to understand what's happening here, visually, because it's the trippiest thing South Park has ever done, and it doesn't involve a single moment of visual transformation. The animation doesn't change at all. The world still looks exactly the same as it always has. The only thing that changes is the sound design. When Stan listens to music, we hear farting noises. When he watches movie trailers, the voiceover alternates between inane puns and literally saying, whatever, F you. When he looks at Kyle, Kyle's dialogue becomes the sound of defecation. The trippiness is entirely in Stan's subjective experience, and the show communicates it through audio rather than visuals. You're inside Stan's head, hearing what he hears, and what he hears is the world turning to rubbish. And here's the thing that kills me about this episode. Parker and Stone have been open about the fact that Stan's existential crisis was a parallel with their own. At the time this episode aired, Stone had just turned 40, and Parker was 41. They'd been making South Park for 14 years, and in interviews, they've talked about how the idea for the episode grew out of their genuine feeling that things they used to enjoy had lost their luster. The sparkle was gone. Everything felt like it was getting worse, getting dumber, getting more cynical. And they didn't know if the world had actually changed, or if they had. That's what the episode is asking. Is the world actually getting worse, or are you just getting older? Is everything really turning into excrement, or has your perception shifted so that you can no longer experience joy? And the show doesn't answer. That's the devastating part. It doesn't provide a resolution. Instead, it does something unprecedented for South Park. As Fleetwood Mac's Landslide plays, and I want you to notice that this is the one piece of audio in the entire episode that Stan doesn't perceive as excrement, which is itself a statement about the persistence of genuine emotion even inside complete cynicism. We watch a silent montage. Sharon and Randy separate. They sell the house. Stan, Sharon, and Shelley move into a new apartment. Kyle and Cartman start spending time together, playing video games, sharing a smile. Stan lies alone on his bed in an unfamiliar room. The credits roll in silence. For the first time in South Park's history, the status quo doesn't reset. The episode ends with genuine, unresolved consequences. And a lot of viewers, a lot of them, thought this might be the series finale, that Parker and Stone were saying goodbye. Because what else could this be? The main character has lost his ability to enjoy anything. His family has broken apart. His friendships have dissolved. His father has moved away. And the music that plays over the ending is literally about watching the world change and feeling powerless to stop it. According to Nielsen, 2.29 million people watched this happen in real time, and a significant number of them went online afterwards to ask whether they'd just seen the last episode of South Park. Parker has talked about how the dialogue between Sharon and Randy in the final scenes was written less than 48 hours before broadcast and was one of the last completed parts of the show. He described it almost as an afterthought. But listen to what Sharon says. It's like the same stuff just happens over and over, and then in a week, it just all resets until it happens again. Every week, it's kind of the same story in a different way, but it just keeps getting more and more ridiculous. She's describing the show. She's describing the formula of South Park itself. Every week, something insane happens, and by the next episode, everything is back to normal. And Sharon is saying she can't live like that anymore. Parker and Stone appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart on June 15th. 2011, a week after the episode aired, and they denied being unhappy with the show. In the DVD commentary, Parker said, "Looking back at it, it kinda does look like we're kinda saying, we don't want to do this anymore, but it's not really what we were saying." And I believe him. But I also think the episode spoke a truth that exists independently of its creator's intentions. Sometimes, art says things its makers didn't consciously intend. Sometimes the work is smarter than the people making it. And You're Getting Old is a case where the work captured something about the experience of aging, alongside a piece of culture that is both deeply personal and universally resonant. Now, the show did come back. Season 15 resumed in October 2011 with Asperger's, which resolved, or more accurately, pretended to resolve, Stan's crisis. And this episode deserves closer attention because it's doing something incredibly sophisticated with the concept of altered perception. Stan is misdiagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and sent to a therapy center, which turns out to be a front for a secret society of cynics. A group of people who, like Stan, see the world as literal excrement. Their leader, a direct parody of Morpheus from The Matrix, offers Stan a glass of Jameson Irish whiskey as a serum that will allow him to interact with the illusion world. And when Stan drinks, suddenly everything is normal again. Music sounds good, movies are entertaining, his friends are fun. The world stops being excrement and becomes bearable. And I need you to think about what this is actually saying. In The Matrix, Neo takes a pill to see reality as it truly is, to strip away the illusion and perceive the unfiltered truth. In Asperger's, Stan drinks alcohol to stop seeing reality as it truly is, to restore the illusion and go back to the comfortable fiction that everything is fine. The Matrix's trip is toward truth. South Park's trip is away from it, and the episode presents Stan's alcoholism not as a problem to be solved, but as a reasonable, even necessary response to an unbearable reality. The show isn't endorsing drinking. It's showing, with devastating clarity, why people drink. Stan has a moment near the end of Asperger's where he seems to break through. He refuses the whiskey. He accepts that his life has changed. He says he's excited by the prospect of something new. And then, in a devastating twist, Randy shows up and announces that he and Sharon are reconciling. Everything resets. The status quo returns. And Stan, confronted with the reality that change isn't allowed, that the world will always snap back to the way it was, that nothing will ever truly be different, takes a quiet swig of whiskey on his way out the door. Parker has said the first writers' meeting for Asperger's began with the question, now what the hell do we do? They'd written themselves into a corner with, "You're getting old." They'd broken the show's formula so severely that they didn't know how to put it back together. And the answer they arrived at, the show resets, but Stan secretly self-medicates to cope with the reset, is both a narrative solution and a meta-commentary on the show's own relationship with change. South Park can't change. It can't grow. Its characters can't age. The format demands repetition. And the cost of that repetition, the human cost, is alcoholism. Not for the characters, obviously, but for the creators, for the people who have to sit in the writer's room every Thursday morning and come up with another 22 minutes of content for a show they've been making since they were 27 years old. I think about this a lot. I think about Trey Parker at 7 o'clock in the morning, finishing a script just hours before it airs, knowing that by Thursday, he'll be starting the whole process again. I think about what that does to a person's relationship with their own work. And I think that Stan, taking that swig of whiskey while his friends call him to the movies, is the most honest self-portrait Parker and Stone have ever drawn. And that image, a 10-year-old cartoon character self-medicating with alcohol because he can't face the emptiness of his own perception, is the most trippy, the most disturbing, and the most honest thing South Park has ever put on screen. It's not psychedelic, it's not surreal, it's just real. And that's the trippiest thing of all. I want to sit with that for a moment before we move on, because I think You're Getting Old and Asperger's represent a kind of turning point in South Park's relationship with altered states. Before these episodes, the show's trippiness was largely external: drugs, aliens, alternate dimensions, visual experiments. After them, the show began exploring internal trippiness more frequently, the ways that your own psychology can distort your perception of reality just as effectively as any substance or simulation. But let me swing back now and talk about something lighter. Well, lighter in the South Park sense, which still involves considerable amounts of chaos. Let me talk about the Imagination Land trilogy, Season 11, Episodes 10 through 12, aired October 17th, October 24th, and October 31st, 2007. And these 3 episodes represent what is probably South Park's single most ambitious project in terms of scope, complexity, and, yes, trippiness. The trilogy won the 2008 Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program for programming 1 hour or more. It's the only time South Park has been nominated in that particular category, and it won, which is fitting because the Imagination Land trilogy is the show operating at a scale it had never attempted before and hasn't really attempted since. Here's the premise. Cartman bets Kyle that leprechauns are real. If Cartman proves it, Kyle has to perform an act on Cartman that I'm not going to describe in detail, but which involves Cartman's anatomy. They find a leprechaun. It leads them to Imagination Land, a dimension where every character ever imagined by humanity actually lives. Good characters on one side, evil characters on the other, separated by a barrier. and then terrorists attack Imagination Land. Islamist suicide bombers breach the barrier, and the evil imaginary characters, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, the Alien, the Predator, stormtroopers, flood across and begin attacking the good characters. The US government, which has been monitoring Imagination Land through a Cold War-era portal called Project Imagination Doorway, sends in a military team led by Kurt Russell because, as a general explains, Russell was in the movie that was sort of like this, referring to Stargate. The military expedition is annihilated by the woodland critters from Woodland Critter Christmas, who are among the evil imaginary characters. The government decides to nuke Imagination Land. Meanwhile, throughout all 3 episodes, Cartman's sole focus is getting Kyle to honor their bet. He goes to court. He appeals to the Supreme Court. He breaks into the Pentagon. He is absolutely, completely, devastatingly unwilling to let the end of imagination itself interfere with his demand that Kyle perform a specific act upon his person. And this B-plot, Cartman's obsessive, deranged, hilarious pursuit of his own gratification, runs parallel to a story about the literal destruction of human imagination, and somehow both threads feel equally important. That's the magic of South Park. Cartman wanting Kyle to fulfill a bet has the same narrative weight as the end of creativity, because to Cartman, it does. But the trippy part, the really trippy part, is the philosophical question at the heart of the trilogy. Are imaginary things real? If something exists in the human imagination, does it have a kind of reality? The government considers nuking Imagination Land because they believe it's a real place with real strategic implications. But Cartman loses his court case when a judge rules that imaginary creatures aren't real, which means leprechauns aren't real, which means Kyle doesn't have to fulfill the bet. And the episode presents both positions with equal weight. Imagination is real enough to be threatened by terrorism and defended by the military, but not real enough for a court to enforce a contract based on the existence of a leprechaun. Parker and Stone originally intended the Imagination Land story to be a theatrically released film, a sequel to South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, their 1999 feature. But they ultimately decided the idea wasn't big enough for a movie, and the use of so many copyrighted characters made it feel derivative. So they turned it into a 3-episode arc, which Parker mapped out on a whiteboard the Thursday after the first episode aired. He used the serialized structures of shows like 24 and Battlestar Galactica as templates for plotting the trilogy. And the whole thing was produced, as always, in the 6-day cycle, meaning each individual episode was created in less than a week, despite the trilogy being the most complex narrative South Park had ever attempted. The trilogy ends with Butters saving Imagination Land by using his own imagination. He imagines a world where good triumphs over evil, and because imagination is real within Imagination Land, his vision becomes reality. Santa Claus battles the evil characters. Good wins. The barrier is restored. And Kyle, freed from his obligation when the court ruled imaginary beings aren't real, walks away without having to fulfill the bet. Cartman, unable to accept this, creates an imaginary version of Kyle and an imaginary version of himself. And in the final shot, the imaginary Kyle performs the act on the imaginary Cartman, while the imaginary Cartman sighs contentedly. It's disgusting. It's hilarious. And it's also a perfect thesis statement. If imaginary things are real, then Cartman's fantasy is as valid as anyone else's reality. The show wins the argument and the joke simultaneously. And I think that's one of the things that makes South Park's approach to trippiness so unique. Most shows that explore altered states, most science fiction, most prestige television, most animation, treat the question of what is real as a dramatic, serious, weighty inquiry. South Park treats it as all of those things, and also as a fart joke. The profundity and the vulgarity coexist. They're the same thing. The universe where imagination is real is also the universe where the most important conflict is whether one 10-year-old will perform a sexual act on another 10-year-old's body. And neither element undermines the other. They reinforce each other, because that's how reality actually works. The sublime and the ridiculous are always happening at the same time. And while we're talking about the Imagination Land trilogy, I want to point something out about scale. 3 episodes, an Emmy win, a planned theatrical film, a Cold War portal, terrorists attacking the realm of human creativity, the Supreme Court adjudicating a bet between 2 children, Kurt Russell leading a military expedition because he was in a movie sort of like this. These 3 episodes represent South Park operating at a level of ambition that should, by all rights, be impossible within a 6-day production cycle. And the fact that Parker mapped out the entire trilogy structure on a whiteboard the Thursday morning after the first episode aired, meaning the second and third episodes were still being written and animated while the first was already on the air, is one of those production facts that makes me dizzy every time I think about it. The whole thing was flying blind. The whole thing was improvised. And the whole thing won an Emmy. I want to talk about the Pandemic 2-parter now, because these episodes represent one of South Park's most visually bizarre experiments, and they don't get nearly enough credit for how weird they actually are. Season 12, episodes 10 and 11, Pandemic and Pandemic 2: The Startling, aired October 22nd and October 29th, 2008. The plot involves the boys starting a Peruvian pan flute band to make money, getting arrested by Homeland Security, and being shipped to Peru, where they discover that the flute bands are actually ancient guardians who keep giant guinea pigs trapped in the jungle. When the government rounds up all the flute bands, the guinea pigs are unleashed upon the world. Craig Tucker, previously just a background character known for flipping people off, is revealed to be the prophesied chosen one who can stop them, and the guinea pigs are live action, real guinea pigs. Filmed on green screen, wearing tiny costumes, pirate hats, bee outfits, rabbit ears, and composited into the animated world of South Park. The result is deeply, profoundly strange. These adorable, twitching, nose-wiggling real animals are presented as terrifying kaiju-level threats, destroying buildings and terrorizing animated citizens. And because the animation is flat and two-dimensional, while the guinea pigs are three-dimensional and photographic, the clash of visual styles creates a dissonance that is simultaneously funny and genuinely unsettling. Your brain can't reconcile what it's seeing. An animated construction paper person is running from a real guinea pig in a pirate costume, and the show treats it with absolute sincerity, as though this is the most terrifying thing anyone has ever witnessed. Meanwhile, Randy Marsh's entire B-plot is a parody of the 2008 film Cloverfield. He films everything with a handheld camera, shaky footage, heavy breathing, constant zooming. The South Park scenes filmed from Randy's perspective use the found footage cinematography style, which means you're watching an animated show that's pretending to be a live-action shaky cam horror film that's actually being attacked by real guinea pigs wearing costumes. If that's not trippy, I genuinely don't know what is. And the kicker, the perfect South Park punchline, is that at the very end of the 2-parter, Randy tries to show everyone his footage, only to discover that he never put a tape in the camera. Everything he filmed, all those dramatic, shaky, breathless sequences we watched, was never actually recorded. The document doesn't exist. The evidence of the experience has vanished. And that might be the trippiest element of all. This idea that you can live through something extraordinary and have absolutely nothing to show for it. The experience was real. The record of it is fiction. And I think the Pandemic episodes also do something interesting with the concept of the reluctant chosen one that ties into our broader theme about perception. Craig doesn't want to save the world. He doesn't believe in the prophecy. He doesn't accept the framework that's been imposed on him. And the prophecy comes true anyway, specifically because Craig's refusal to participate triggers the exact sequence of events the prophecy predicted. You can reject the narrative. You can refuse to believe in the framework. But the framework doesn't need your belief to operate. Reality doesn't care whether you accept it or not. That's a genuinely trippy philosophical point, delivered through an episode about guinea pigs and pirate hats, and I think it's worth sitting with. Let me tell you about Quest for Ratings now, because this one doesn't get enough attention in discussions of trippy South Park episodes, and it absolutely deserves a place in the conversation. Season 8, Episode 11. Aired November 17th, 2004. And this is the cough syrup episode. The boys are running a school news show called Super School News on South Park Elementary's closed-circuit television. Cartman and Jimmy are the anchors. Butters does entertainment reporting. Stan is a field reporter. Tolkien does the weather. Kyle covers sports. The show is terrible. They're losing in the ratings to Craig's show. Animals close-up with a wide-angle lens, which is literally just footage of animals filmed at close range with a wide-angle lens, set to a parody of the Benny Hill theme. The boys try everything to boost ratings. They revamp their look. Big 70s news anchor hair. They sensationalize stories. They bring in Raisin's girls. Nothing works. Craig responds to every one of their innovations by adding one tiny element. At one point, he just puts hats on the animals. And somehow, that's enough. Desperate for creative inspiration, the boys go to a pharmacy and buy cough syrup specifically to Tripp. And the pharmacist, this detail is so perfectly South Park, doesn't refuse. He doesn't lecture them about drugs. He helpfully explains which brands contain the active ingredient that causes hallucinations and which ones don't. He draws the line only at requiring parental permission, and then immediately laughs and says he's just kidding. He sells them the drugs, and the Tripp sequence that follows is one of the most visually inventive things South Park has ever done. The show cuts to live-action footage of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, cable cars, California Street, intercut with kaleidoscopic visual effects and pulsing, distorted music. It's genuinely disorienting. The boys run wild. They pass out. They wake up hours later in front of Craig's show, which now features animals with hats, and they think it's the greatest thing they've ever seen. And this is where the episode becomes something more than a comedy about drugs. Because the boys realize, in their post-trip haze, why Craig's show has been getting such high ratings. The kids at school have been watching it while high on cough syrup. That's why a show with no content is beating a show with actual news. The audience is on drugs. The substance isn't inspiring creativity. It's dissolving quality control. And the boys' solution is to expose the cough syrup problem in a hard-hitting investigative report that gets the substance banned from school. Ratings for Craig's show collapse. The boys win. And here's the meta layer that makes this episode genuinely special. Parker and Stone have said that the storyline about the boys being unable to come up with ideas for their show was directly autobiographical. Season 8 was produced simultaneously with Team America, World Police, and the creative team was exhausted. The episode's idea room, where the boys sit around a table staring at each other, unable to think of anything, is modeled after South Park's actual writer's room. The desperate search for inspiration, the willingness to try anything, the eventual decision to just bail when they can't come up with anything good. All of it mirrors what Parker and Stone were experiencing in real life. At one point during production, the staff was so depleted of concepts that Parker and Stone genuinely considered showing animal close-ups for 22 minutes and calling it an episode. That's not a joke. That's something that almost happened. The show almost aired 22 minutes of dogs and cats wearing hats, scored to a Benny Hill parody, as an actual episode of South Park. And there are production details buried in this episode that only the most devoted fans would catch. Matt Stone's dog, Mister. Yes, and Trey Parker's cat, Jake, both appear in Craig's Animals Close-Up with a wide-angle lens segments. The sleek studio the boys use for their investigative report on cough syrup is designed to look like the set of 2020. Jimmy gets an interview with then Vice President Dick Cheney, but nobody cares. Tolkien's last name is confirmed as Black in this episode, even though it was previously introduced as Williams in Season 5's Here Comes the Neighborhood. It's a show that buries character continuity, real-world references, and self-aware production jokes in every frame, and it does it while its characters are literally tripping on cough syrup. The cough syrup trip sequence itself deserves particular attention. The boys take their medicine, and the show cuts to live-action footage of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge, the cable cars on California Street, the hills gleaming in what appears to be late afternoon light. Kaleidoscopic visual effects pulse and shimmer over the real-world footage. The audio distorts, and then we cut back to the boys in the South Park animation style, disoriented, sprawled in various positions, with a naked Butters face down in Kyle's lap, a detail that nobody in the episode comments on, and that the show never explains. When they come to, Kyle discovers that the only thing he wrote down during the entire trip was the lyrics to the Happy Days theme song. Their notepads are useless. The trip produced nothing. And this sequence is doing something that I find really interesting in the context of our broader exploration. It's contrasting two types of visual content: the live-action footage of a real city and the animated footage of a cartoon town, in a way that blurs the boundary between them. The trip takes the boys out of their animated world and deposits them, briefly, in ours. The real San Francisco intrudes on the fictional South Park. And the message, if there is one, is that altered consciousness doesn't just change how you see your own world. It shows you other worlds entirely. It makes the boundaries between realities permeable. So the cough syrup isn't just a plot device. It's a metaphor for the creative process under extreme pressure. When you're out of ideas, when the deadline is bearing down and nothing is working, there's a temptation to reach for something, anything, that will break the logjam. Sometimes that's cough syrup. Sometimes it's just staying up until 3 in the morning staring at a whiteboard. And sometimes the thing that breaks through isn't brilliance. It's just the lowering of your standards enough that mediocrity starts looking acceptable. That's what the trip represents. Not inspiration, but the dissolution of the critical faculty that prevents you from accepting bad ideas. And honestly, that might be the most honest thing any creative person has ever said about the relationship between altered consciousness and artistic output. Getting high doesn't make you creative. It makes you less able to recognize that your ideas are bad. And the fact that this insight is buried inside a cartoon where Butters wakes up naked in another boy's lap and nobody addresses it, that's South Park in a nutshell. I want to talk about A Ladder to Heaven now. Season 6, Episode 12. Aired November 6th, 2002. And this is an episode where the trippiness comes from a place you might not expect: grief. The boys have won a candy prize, but the winning ticket was with Kenny when he died. And Kenny, at this point in the show's timeline, is genuinely dead. He'd been killed off in the Season 5 finale, Kenny Dies, and stayed dead for most of Season 6. So the boys decide to build a ladder to heaven to find Kenny and get the ticket back. Now, I need to pause here and acknowledge something about this premise, because it's easy to rush past it and miss what's actually happening. The boys are building a literal ladder to heaven, not metaphorically, not as a thought experiment. They're stacking lumber and plywood into the sky because they genuinely believe that if they build high enough, they'll reach the place where dead people go. And the show treats this with a perfectly calibrated mix of comedy and sincerity. The boys aren't stupid. Well, Cartman might be, but Stan and Kyle know this is unlikely to work. But they do it anyway, because they want to see their friend. Because the alternative, accepting that Kenny is gone, and the ticket is gone, and you just have to move on, is too painful to accept. And the adults, hearing that the boys want to build a ladder to heaven to see their dead friend, are deeply moved. They don't know about the candy ticket. They think these children are expressing pure, beautiful grief. A media circus erupts. Singer Alan Jackson shows up to capitalize on people's emotions with a song. The military gets involved when aerial photos of clouds above the ladder suggest Saddam Hussein is building weapons of mass destruction in heaven. Japan starts building a competing ladder. Meanwhile, Cartman has accidentally consumed Kenny's cremated ashes, mistaking them for chocolate milk mix, and he starts having flashbacks, seeing Kenny's memories, hearing Kenny's thoughts. Kenny is, in a very real sense, possessing Cartman from inside, and the visual representation of this is genuinely unsettling. Every time something hits Cartman in the head, he enters a trance state and experiences fragments of Kenny's life. The animation doesn't change dramatically, but there's a shimmer, a dissociation, a sense that we're watching one consciousness overlap with another. And the political satire here is as sharp as anything the show has ever done. The episode aired just over a year after 9/11 and less than 6 months before the invasion of Iraq. The entire subplot about Saddam building weapons in heaven is a direct, savage parody of the Bush administration's justification for the coming war, the dubious intelligence, the dramatic presentations at the United Nations, the leap from ambiguous evidence to apocalyptic conclusions. And the genius of framing it within a story about a children's ladder to heaven is that it highlights the fundamental absurdity of the whole enterprise. The same institutions that can't tell the difference between a child's naive project and a genuine engineering feat are claiming to know, with certainty, what's being built in the clouds above them. But what makes this episode trippy, really trippy, is the ending. Cartman has enough of Kenny's memories to locate the candy ticket. The boys get their prize. They lose interest in the ladder. And Stan delivers one of the most perfectly South Park lines in the show's history. Yeah, but now we think maybe heaven isn't a place you can get to. Maybe heaven is just an idea, a frame of mind, or something gay like that. Maybe heaven is this moment, right now. And then the final shot reveals that Saddam Hussein actually is building weapons of mass destruction in heaven. God investigates, and Saddam talks his way out of it with the most transparently ridiculous logic imaginable. And it works. God walks away. The final image is Saddam laughing. So what's real? Is heaven real? Are the weapons real? Is the ladder a genuine spiritual endeavor or a selfish scheme for candy? Is Cartman genuinely channeling Kenny, or has he just absorbed enough of his friend's biological material To trigger some kind of chemical memory? The episode doesn't resolve any of these questions. It just lets them coexist, in layers, each one making the other stranger. There's also something worth noting about the Alan Jackson subplot that I think connects to our broader discussion. Alan Jackson shows up to sing at the base of the ladder, capitalizing on the emotion of the moment. And the show makes it clear that this is what popular culture does. It takes genuine human experiences, genuine grief, genuine confusion about the nature of existence, and it packages them into consumable entertainment. The boys are trying to reach heaven. The adults are trying to feel something. The military is trying to find weapons. The media is trying to generate content. And everyone is looking at the same ladder and seeing something completely different. The ladder is a Rorschach test made of plywood. It reveals nothing about heaven and everything about the people looking at it. And isn't that exactly what South Park itself is? A crude construction of plywood and paper that different people look at and see completely different things? Some see toilet humor. Some see political commentary. Some see philosophical depth. Some see juvenile provocation. And the show never tells you which interpretation is correct, because all of them are. The trip is subjective. What you see in the ladder depends on what you brought with you when you started climbing. And I think that's ultimately what connects all of these episodes. They're not interested in resolving the question of what's real. They're interested in the feeling of not knowing, the vertigo of uncertainty. The trip isn't the destination, it's the disorientation itself. Let me talk about one more episode in depth, and then I want to pull back and say something about why all of this matters. The episode is Medicinal Fried Chicken, Season 14, Episode 3, aired March 31st, 2010. Now, I can already hear some of you saying, that's not a Trippy episode. That's the one where Randy bounces on his enormous testicles. And yes, it is that episode. But stay with me, because I think the visual imagery in this episode qualifies as some of the most surreal, most genuinely psychedelic material South Park has ever produced. Randy wants to get a medicinal marijuana prescription. To do this, he deliberately gives himself testicular cancer by microwaving his own testicles. His testicles grow to an enormous size. And then, and this is where the episode goes completely off the rails in the best way, Randy and his friends bounce through the streets of South Park on their distended testes, using them as natural hoppity hops, in a sequence that is simultaneously grotesque, hilarious, and strangely beautiful. The animation team created special art to achieve this effect. There were 25 drafts of the microwaving scene alone. Trey Parker acted out Randy's poses using an exercise ball, which the animators used as reference. Meanwhile, Cartman's favorite KFC restaurant has been shut down and replaced by a marijuana dispensary. And Cartman, driven by his love of fried chicken, enters the black market. He becomes a KFC kingpin. The episode transforms into a full-blown crime drama, with Cartman's fried chicken operation mirroring the cartel structure of shows like Scarface and Breaking Bad. He meets with shady dealers. He eliminates competitors. He rises through the ranks of an underground economy built on contraband chicken. And here's the Matt Stone quote that I think captures the essential trippiness of this episode's premise. Stone said it was trippy that something can get more legal while other things become more illegal. Marijuana was becoming accessible while fast food was being regulated. The episode is about the surreal inversion of social norms. The moment when what was once forbidden becomes sanctioned, and what was once ordinary becomes criminal. That's a kind of trippiness that has nothing to do with drugs, and everything to do with the arbitrary, shifting nature of social consensus. The visuals of this episode are genuinely disturbing if you stop to think about them. Randy pushing a wheelbarrow full of his own testicles through the streets. Men bouncing on their inflamed genitals like children on playground equipment. The normalization of self-mutilation in pursuit of a legal high. And it's all presented with the same cheerful, matter-of-fact tone that South Park applies to everything. Nobody in the show treats this as unusual. Randy's neighbors see him with his enormous testicles and react with mild interest, not horror. The town adapts. The new normal is a town where men with cancerous, basketball-sized testicles bounce down Main Street, and everyone just goes about their day. That normalization of the absurd is, I think, one of the most quietly trippy things South Park does as a show. It's not about one episode being weird. It's about the consistent, ongoing presentation of a world where the insane is mundane, where reality shifts on a weekly basis, and where the characters accept each new distortion with the same resigned shrug. The adults of South Park have seen aliens, witnessed multiple celebrity deaths, survived plagues and monsters, and government conspiracies. Nothing phases them anymore. And that numbness, that inability to be shocked, is itself a kind of altered state. And medicinal fried chicken is maybe the purest expression of this principle. There's a scene where Randy and his friends, all with their gigantic, cancerous testicles, are bouncing down the street. They've turned their medical condition into a mode of transportation. They're using their swollen, diseased body parts as recreational equipment. And the townspeople walking past them barely glance up. Nobody calls an ambulance. Nobody screams. The new normal has been accepted with terrifying speed, and the show plays this acceptance completely straight. No winking at the camera, no acknowledgement that this is insane. And that's a commentary on how quickly humans normalize the abnormal. Think about how fast we adapted to the idea of everyone wearing masks during a pandemic. Think about how quickly we normalized carrying supercomputers in our pockets. Think about how easily we accepted that social media companies would harvest our personal data and sell it to advertisers. Each of these things would have seemed bizarre, even dystopian, to someone from even 20 years earlier. But we adapted. We bounced on our inflated testicles and called it normal. And South Park, by presenting the most extreme possible version of this process, holds up a mirror to the way all of us quietly accept the unacceptable every single day. There's also something worth noting about the dual plot structure of Medicinal Fried Chicken that relates to our broader theme. Randy's storyline is about legally accessing a previously forbidden substance by exploiting a medical loophole. Cartman's storyline is about illegally accessing a previously legal substance through criminal channels. The two stories are mirror images of each other, and when you overlay them, they reveal the arbitrary, almost random nature of what's legal and what isn't. Why is weed becoming available at the exact moment fried chicken is being banned? Why is one substance moving from prohibition to acceptance while another moves in the opposite direction? The answer, of course, is that the distinctions between legal and illegal, acceptable and unacceptable, normal and abnormal are not based on any consistent logic. They're cultural constructions. They're agreements. And they can flip at any moment, turning yesterday's criminal into today's customer and today's consumer into tomorrow's felon. That insight, that the framework of legality and social acceptability is itself a kind of shared hallucination, a collective agreement to pretend that arbitrary distinctions are natural laws, is profoundly trippy. And it's delivered through a story about a man microwaving his own testicles and a child smuggling fried chicken. Because of course it is. That's how South Park works. The deepest insights are always served in the most absurd possible containers. And I want to bring up another episode that often gets overlooked in discussions of South Park's trippiest moments, but absolutely belongs in the conversation. You Have Zero Friends, Season 14, Episode 4, aired April 7th, 2010. This is the Facebook episode, and it's trippier than most people give it credit for. The main plot involves Stan being forced to join Facebook, and the social media platform gradually taking over his life. But the trippy part, the really trippy part, comes when Stan gets literally sucked into Facebook. He enters the social network as a physical space, a digital world rendered in the show's animation style, but with glowing neon edges and data streams flowing through the environment. It's basically a Tron parody. But what makes it effective is how it externalizes something that is, for most people, an entirely invisible experience. The algorithm that controls your social media life, the way platforms manipulate your connections, the pressure to maintain a digital identity that doesn't correspond to your real self, all of that becomes a physical landscape that Stan has to navigate. And there's a subplot about a socially awkward kid named Kip Jordy who is desperately trying to get even one Facebook friend. Kyle befriends him out of pity, only to be socially ostracized, because having Kip as a friend drags down his social media profile. And despite the goofy, sci-fi trappings of the main plot, this subplot is painfully real. The idea that your value as a person can be quantified and displayed publicly, that your social connections can be counted and compared, that befriending the wrong person can cost you status, that's not fiction. That's a description of how social media actually works. And by placing this realistic human drama inside a visually trippy Tron parody, the episode creates a jarring contrast between the fantastical and the mundane that makes the commentary hit harder. There's also Inception from season 14, episode 10, aired October 20th, 2010, which is a direct parody of Christopher Nolan's Inception, and it takes the reality layering concept from grounded Vindaloop and applies it in a different context. In this episode, Mackie is hoarding, and the school counselor's office is full of junk. So the boys enter his dreams to help him work through his psychological issues. Dreams within dreams within dreams. And the episode has this brilliant running gag where nobody in the show has actually seen Inception. So they keep needing someone to explain how dream layers work, which is a perfect meta-commentary on how convoluted Nolan's film actually is. The Fisher-Price phone is ringing inside the dream, and they need to wake up at specific times. And there are kicks within kicks, and the whole thing gets so tangled that the characters, and probably a fair number of viewers, completely lose track of which level of dream they're in. But underneath the parody, there's something genuinely poignant happening. Mr. Mackey's hoarding is connected to a childhood trauma. The dream diving isn't just a comedy device. It's a representation of therapy, of the process of going deeper into someone's psyche to find the root cause of their dysfunction. And the fact that this process requires entering a space that looks and feels like a different reality, that's actually a pretty accurate description of what therapy does. You enter someone else's subjective experience. You navigate their internal landscape. And what you find there is often strange, frightening, and nothing like what you expected. I keep coming back to this idea that South Park's trippiest episodes are always doing double duty. On the surface, they're visual spectacles, or narrative puzzles, or drug comedy. But underneath, they're always about something else. Something real. Something human. Something that the trippy surface is simultaneously concealing and revealing. And there are episodes I haven't even mentioned yet that fit this pattern. Make Love, Not Warcraft, Season 10, Episode 8, aired October 4th, 2006, where the boys spend weeks grinding in World of Warcraft to defeat a griefer who's killing everyone in the game. The episode uses actual World of Warcraft footage blended with the show's animation, creating another instance of medium blending where the boundary between the animated world and the digital world dissolves. The boys' avatars look nothing like them. Their in-game identities are powerful warriors and mages, while their real bodies become increasingly overweight, pale, and sedentary. It's another variation on the gap between perception and reality that Good Times with Weapons explored. The anime episode showed how kids imagine themselves as powerful warriors, and Make Love, Not Warcraft shows how adults, well, kids who are aging prematurely through gaming addiction, lose themselves in digital avatars while their physical selves deteriorate. The trip in this case isn't chemical or supernatural, it's technological. It's the same altered state that millions of people voluntarily enter every day when they put on a headset or sit down at a keyboard. And honestly, that might be the most prescient thing about South Park's approach to trippiness. While other shows in the 2000s and 2010s were treating virtual reality and social media as futuristic concepts to be explored through science fiction, South Park was treating them as what they already were: everyday altered states that people entered and exited constantly, often without realizing that their perception of reality was being fundamentally changed in the process. Think about it. Facebook changes how you see your friendships. World of Warcraft changes how you see your body and your capabilities. Virtual reality headsets change how you distinguish between real and simulated experiences. Cough syrup changes how you evaluate the quality of what you're consuming. And growing up changes how you feel about everything you used to love. None of these are exotic or unusual. They're all completely ordinary parts of modern life. And South Park's genius is in recognizing that the ordinary is already trippy. You don't need to go to Imagination Land to have your reality altered. You just need to check your phone. There's another dimension to South Park's trippiness that I want to explore before we start wrapping things up, and it's the show's relationship with time. Because one of the trippiest aspects of a show that's been running for nearly 3 decades is the way it interacts with its own history. Consider this: South Park's characters don't age. Stan, Kyle, Cartman, and Kenny have been in 4th grade since 1997. They've witnessed 9/11, the Iraq War, the Obama presidency, the Trump presidency, the COVID pandemic, the rise and fall of dozens of social media platforms, the complete transformation of American culture, all while remaining 8 to 10 years old. Time moves around them, but not through them. History happens to them without changing them. And that's its own kind of altered state, a temporal dissociation where you're present in every moment, but permanent in none. I've been thinking about this a lot while rewatching episodes for this video. There's a specific kind of vertigo you get when you watch a South Park episode from, say, 2004, and then immediately watch one from 2024. The world references are completely different. The political targets have shifted. The technology has changed. In Season 8, they're buying weapons at a county fair, and by Season 26, they're dealing with AI chatbots. But the characters look exactly the same. They sound exactly the same. They're wearing the same clothes, sitting at the same desks, walking to the same bus stop. It's like watching a time lapse of the world through a window that never moves. Everything outside changes. The window stays. And there's something deeply uncanny about that permanence. In real life, we expect things to change. We expect people to age. We expect the world to evolve. When something stays exactly the same for 3 decades, it starts to feel wrong. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, but in a subtle, disorienting way. It's the uncanny valley of narrative time. The characters are almost like real people, but they lack the one quality that makes real people real: the passage of time through their bodies and minds. The show has acknowledged this multiple times. You're Getting Old makes Stan's 10th birthday into a cosmic event. Cancelled starts by replaying the show's very first episode and having the characters recognize they're stuck in a repeat. Member berries in Season 20 used nostalgia-producing fruit to literalize the way we cling to past experiences. And every time the show looks back at itself, every time it references an earlier episode, or has a character remember something that happened seasons ago, or brings back a character who hasn't appeared in years, it creates a temporal vertigo that is genuinely disorienting if you think about it too hard. I remember rewatching the first season recently, the episodes from 1997, and being struck by how different the show feels. Not just visually, although the animation is rougher and more genuinely crude, but tonally. The early episodes have a kind of innocence to them, a wide-eyed gleefulness about their own transgression that the later episodes have lost. The show used to be surprised by its own audacity. Now, it takes its audacity for granted. And that change, from delight to routine, from surprise to expectation, is itself a form of the cynicism that You're Getting Old diagnoses. The show has gotten older even if the characters haven't, and the audience has gotten older alongside it, carrying memories of earlier episodes like photographs from a childhood we can no longer return to. Because here's the thing, if you started watching South Park when it premiered in August 1997, and you've been watching continuously, you've spent nearly 30 years with these characters. You've aged. They haven't. You might have been Stan's age when the show started, and now you're Randy's age. And they're still the same kids, having the same arguments at the same bus stop. That's not just a storytelling convention. That's a lived experience of temporal distortion. The show is a time machine that only works in one direction, and it takes you with it while leaving its characters behind. And I think that disconnect between the viewer's experience of time and the character's experience of time is one of the reasons the Trippy episodes resonate so deeply with longtime fans. When Stan develops cynicism in You're Getting Old, it's devastating not just because of what's happening to the character, but because it mirrors what's happening to the viewer. You're getting older. The show isn't. And the gap between your perception and the show's fixed reality grows wider with every passing year. That's a trip that no drug can replicate, and no VR headset can simulate. It's the trip of growing up while the thing you love stays the same. And South Park, more than any other long-running show, has been willing to look that trip directly in the eye and say, yeah, this is weird. This is hard, and we don't know what to do about it either. I want to mention something else before we start wrapping up, because there's an aspect of South Park's trippiness that I've been circling around without naming directly, and I think it deserves explicit attention. It's the show's relationship with music. Trey Parker is a genuinely talented musician. He co-wrote the songs for South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, with Mark Shaman, and Blame Canada was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Song at the 72nd Academy Awards. He co-created The Book of Mormon, which won 9 Tony Awards in 2011, including Best Musical. And within the show itself, music functions as one of the primary vehicles for altered perception. Think about the musical moments in the episodes we've discussed. Let's Fighting Love in Good Times with Weapons, a song that deliberately sounds like something you'd hear in an anime series, complete with authentic Japanese lyrics that functions as a portal into the boys' shared fantasy. The 3 heavy metal soundtrack songs in Major Boobage: Heavy Metal, Taken a Ride by Don Felder, Heavy Metal by Sammy Hagar, and Radar Rider by Riggs, each of which accompanies a different phase of Kenny's hallucination, creating a sonic landscape that is as crucial to the trip as the visuals. The Imagination song in the Imagination Land trilogy, which literally opens a portal to another dimension. And of course, Landslide by Fleetwood Mac in You're Getting Old, the one piece of music in the entire episode that Stan doesn't perceive as excrement, which makes it not just a soundtrack choice, but a narrative statement about the persistence of beauty even inside total despair. Music in South Park is never just background. It's always doing something. It's altering your perception of a scene, shifting the emotional register, creating a contrast between what you see and what you hear. And in the trippiest episodes, music is often the mechanism through which the trip is delivered. Kenny gets high and soars through a heavy metal universe set to classic rock. The boys buy weapons and enter an anime fantasy scored by J-pop parody. Stan turns 10, and the world becomes excrement because the music changed. In each case, the auditory experience is inseparable from the visual one. The trip is multi-sensory, and I think this is another reason why South Park's trippy episodes resonate so deeply with people watching late at night, perhaps in exactly the state this channel is designed for. When you're lying in bed with your eyes half closed, the visual dimension of the show fades. What remains is the sound, the voices, the music, the texture of the audio design. And in these episodes, the sound alone is enough to carry the trip. You don't need to see Kenny soaring through a landscape of flesh. You can hear the guitar riff that accompanies it, and your imagination does the rest. The show that looks deliberately crude becomes, in the darkness behind your eyelids, a show of limitless visual possibility, because the pictures are being generated by your own mind, using the audio as a prompt. That's maybe the most fitting observation I can make about a show called South Park being the subject of a video on a channel called Papertown that's designed to help you fall asleep. The trip continues even after you close your eyes, especially after you close your eyes. There's one more thread I want to pull on before we reach the end of tonight's journey, and it connects back to where we started, with Kenny, floating through a sky of flesh in Major Boobage. Kenny McCormick is, in many ways, the trippiest character South Park has ever created. Not because of his drug use, although that's part of it, but because of his relationship with death. For the first 5 seasons of the show, Kenny died in almost every episode, and returned the following week with no explanation. Nobody remembered his death. Nobody mourned him for longer than a few seconds. Reality reset every single time. And then the show started playing with this. They revealed that Kenny has a supernatural ability. He literally cannot die permanently. He comes back every time. And the truly disturbing part is that he remembers every death. He remembers the pain. He remembers the experience of dying, and nobody else does. He is trapped in a loop of suffering that only he can perceive. Everyone around him lives in a world where death is temporary and consequence-free, while Kenny lives in a world where death is permanent and agonizing. He just keeps getting pulled back. If that's not a trippy premise, I don't know what is. A child who experiences death repeatedly, who carries the memory of every death, who cannot escape the cycle, and who cannot communicate this experience to anyone because they won't remember. It's Sisyphus. It's Groundhog Day. It's a horror story disguised as a running gag. And the fact that Kenny gravitates toward altered states, huffing cat urine, getting high, seeking escape through substances, makes perfect sense in this context. If you experienced death every week and nobody believed you, wouldn't you want to alter your perception too? Wouldn't you seek any exit from a reality that is, for you alone, unbearable? The heavy metal sequences in Major Boobage take on a completely different weight when you consider this. Kenny isn't just getting high for fun. He's escaping the beautiful, fluid, nonsensical world of the hallucination. A world of impossible landscapes and fantasy women and soaring flight is a world where death doesn't matter, where pain doesn't persist, where the crushing weight of being the only person who remembers is briefly, blissfully lifted. And that's maybe the deepest layer of Major Boobage, the layer that took me multiple rewatches to notice, and that I've never seen anyone else talk about. Kenny's addiction to cheesing isn't just a satirical vehicle for drug policy commentary. It's a psychologically coherent response to existential trauma. The most trippy character on the show is also the most traumatized. and his pursuit of altered states is a coping mechanism for a reality that is genuinely, objectively worse than everyone else's. I need to take a breath here, because that's a heavy thought for a show where the same character once died by being crushed by the space shuttle Mir. But that's South Park. That's the contradiction at the heart of it. The heaviest ideas are always dressed in the lightest clothes. The most profound observations are always delivered by construction paper children who talk about balls and boogers and butts. And the trip, the real trip, the one that South Park has been on since 1997, is the trip of discovering that intelligence and vulgarity are not opposites. That depth and crudeness can coexist. That you can make a show out of paper cutouts and fart sounds and still, somehow, produce something that makes you think about the nature of reality while you're falling asleep. Okay, I want to pull way back now and talk about something that I think ties all of this together, because I've been going through these episodes individually, showing how each one plays with perception in a different way. But the real insight, the thing that I kept circling back to while putting this video together, the idea that I couldn't shake, is that South Park's trippiest quality isn't any individual episode. It's the show's entire relationship with its own existence. Think about the 6-day production cycle. Every week, Parker and Stone walk into the writer's room with nothing. No script, no story, no characters, nothing. And 6 days later, a finished episode airs. The show is built on the edge of a creative cliff. It exists in a permanent state of emergency. And that urgency gives it a quality that no other show has. A raw, unfiltered, barely controlled energy that feels like the creative equivalent of an altered state. Parker has talked about this. In the 6 Days to Air documentary, he says something that I think is incredibly revealing. He says that if he had 4 weeks to make an episode, he'd just spend 4 weeks second-guessing himself. The deadline isn't a constraint, it's a drug. It forces a state of consciousness where the filter between thought and output dissolves. There's no time for self-censorship, no time for focus groups, no time for corporate notes. The ideas go from brain to screen with almost no intermediary steps. And the result is a show that feels like it's vibrating at a frequency that other shows can't reach, because other shows have time to smooth out the edges, to polish away the weirdness, to replace the strange ideas with safe ones. South Park doesn't have that luxury, and its best moments, its trippiest, most inventive, most surprising moments, exist precisely because of that absence. There's a famous writing principle that Parker uses, which has become widely known among screenwriters and content creators since the documentary aired. He talks about connecting scenes with therefore and but instead of and then. If something happens, the next thing should happen because of it, or in spite of it, not merely after it. And he credits this principle partly to the time pressure. When you only have 6 days, you can't afford scenes that don't connect to each other. Every moment has to earn its place. Every beat has to flow from the one before it. And that ruthless efficiency creates a narrative density that is itself a kind of altered state for the viewer. You're being carried through the story at a pace that doesn't allow you to get ahead of it. You're always slightly off balance. You're always being surprised. And that off-balance, surprised feeling is a core component of what makes South Park's trippiest episodes work. Think about grounded Vindaloop. Every new revelation follows logically from the previous one. Therefore, Cartman calls customer service. But the customer service agent is also in VR. Therefore, he calls his own customer service. But that creates a feedback loop. The therefore/but chain creates an inexorable escalation that pulls you deeper and deeper into the confusion until you can't find your way back. And that's not an accident of rushed production. It's a feature of it. The 6-day cycle doesn't just produce episodes. It produces a specific kind of cognitive experience. Fast, dense, disorienting, and deeply engaging. The show itself is a trip. Its entire production model is an altered state. And the episodes we've been talking about tonight, the ones where the animation transforms, where reality breaks, where perception shifts, where the line between real and imagined dissolves, those are just the episodes where the show's natural trippiness becomes text instead of subtext, where the thing South Park always is becomes the thing South Park is explicitly about. And I think that's why these episodes resonate so deeply. It's not just because they're visually inventive or philosophically interesting or darkly funny. It's because they feel honest. They feel like glimpses of what it's actually like inside the heads of two men who have been making a show under insane conditions for almost 3 decades, who routinely stay up until 7 in the morning finishing scripts, who have admitted that they frequently hate their work the moment it's completed, who have questioned whether the show should continue, who have explored their own cynicism and exhaustion and creative desperation through the characters they created when they were in their mid-20s and who they're now voicing in their 50s. Every Trippy episode of South Park is, in some way, about the experience of making South Park. Kenny's hallucinogenic journey in Major Boobage is about the allure of escapism when reality is exhausting. The boys' anime fantasies in Good Times with Weapons are about the gap between how you see yourself and how you actually are. Stan's cynicism in You're Getting Old is about the terror of losing your ability to enjoy the thing you've devoted your life to. Butters' VR loops in Grounded Vindaloop are about the impossibility of knowing which version of yourself is the real one when you've spent decades performing. Cancelled is about the fear that your audience will eventually lose interest and your world will be destroyed. And the Imagination Land trilogy is about the radical, desperate, irrational belief that what you create in your head is real, that it matters, that imagination is worth fighting for, even when the government wants to nuke it. These episodes aren't just entertaining, they're confessional. And the trip they take you on isn't into some external fantasy world. It's into the psyche of creation itself. I think about this a lot, honestly. I think about the fact that there's a show out there, a cartoon about construction paper kids in a small Colorado town, that has been exploring the nature of consciousness and perception for over 25 years. And most people still think it's just a crude comedy. And yeah, it is crude. It is a comedy. But it's also one of the most sustained, serious, and surprisingly profound investigations of how we experience reality that American popular culture has ever produced. And the thing is, it has to be crude to do what it does. The crudeness is the point. The construction paper aesthetic, the fart jokes, the offensive language, the deliberate ugliness, all of it serves the same purpose as Kenny's goggles or Butters' VR headset. It's a filter. It's a frame that tells you, this isn't serious, this doesn't matter, don't worry about it. And because you've been told not to take it seriously, your defenses drop. Your critical faculty relaxes. And the show slips ideas past your guard that you would never accept from a serious source. South Park can ask you, what is the nature of reality? And you don't feel lectured or condescended to, because the question is being asked by a construction paper 10-year-old who was just bouncing on his father's irradiated testicles 2 episodes ago. The crude surface is the vehicle. The trip is what happens underneath. And I want to end tonight with a thought that I can't quite resolve, which is maybe appropriate given what we've been talking about. Because here's the question that keeps nagging at me every time I rewatch these episodes. Every time I peel back another layer and find something new underneath. South Park has spent over 2 decades showing us that reality can be distorted, questioned, broken, and rebuilt. It's shown us that perception is unreliable, that consciousness is malleable, that the line between real and imagined is thinner than we think. It's given us episodes where drugs change how we see, where imagination creates worlds, where virtual reality erases the boundary between truth and simulation, where growing up rewires your ability to experience joy. But it's never answered the question that all of these episodes are circling. It's never told us what's actually at the bottom. Is there a base reality? Is there a version of the world that isn't filtered through some lens, substance, imagination, cynicism, narrative, ideology? Is there a way to see things as they actually are? Stan, at the end of You're Getting Old, can't. Everything looks like excrement to him. And at the end of Asperger's, his solution isn't to fix his perception, it's to numb it with alcohol. Butters, at the end of Grounded Vindaloop, looks at real children and calls it reality. But we, the viewers, know that those children are actors, and the real world they're in is just another layer of fiction. Kenny, at the end of Major Boobage, goes back to his regular life. But we've seen what's inside his head, and we can't unsee it. The world of South Park is permanently altered by what these episodes have shown us about how fragile our sense of reality is. And I don't think we're supposed to find the answer. I don't think there is one. I think the whole point of South Park's trippiest episodes is that the question itself is the destination. The vertigo is the message. We're all Kenny, floating through a sky we don't understand. We're all Stan, wondering if the world has changed, or if we have. We're all Butters, taking off one pair of goggles only to discover we're wearing another pair underneath. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most comforting thought of all. Because if nobody knows what's real, then we're all in this together. We're all tripping. We're all watching the same construction paper show, filtering it through our own goggles, and finding different things on the other side. And isn't that, in the end, exactly what Trey Parker and Matt Stone have been saying all along? That the trip isn't something that happens to some people in some episodes. The trip is life itself, and the best you can do is find someone to watch it with. Thank you for watching this. Thank you for being here, whether you've been with the channel from the beginning or this is your first video. Thank you for caring about a cartoon enough to spend hours listening to someone talk about it. That means something to me, more than I can really express. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. It's the single best thing you can do to help this channel keep growing. And every new subscriber genuinely motivates me to keep going deeper, keep finding new angles, keep treating this show with the seriousness and the love that I think it deserves. And the next time you rewatch South Park, any episode, not just the ones we covered tonight, pay attention to the goggles. Pay attention to what the show is asking you to see, and how, and why. Because beneath the crude surface, beneath the fart jokes, and the construction paper, and the deliberate ugliness, there's something extraordinary happening. There's a trip being offered, and it's been going on for almost 30 years now, week after week, 6 days at a time, delivered just hours before broadcast by a man rushing a tape to a satellite uplink, while the creators finally, exhaustedly, sit back and wonder if any of it was real. I want to leave you with one last image. In the 6 Days to Air documentary, there's a moment near the end where the episode is finished. The tape has been sent, the office empties, and Parker, who has been awake for most of the past 48 hours, sits alone in a chair in the writer's room. The whiteboards are covered in scribbled ideas, some crossed out, some circled, some connected by arrows that no longer make sense to anyone except the people who drew them. And he looks tired, not triumphant, not satisfied, just tired, like a man who has been on a very long trip and isn't sure whether he arrived somewhere or just exhausted himself along the way. That's the image I carry with me from this whole exploration. Not Kenny flying through a sky of breasts. Not Stan seeing his best friend as a pile of excrement. Not Butters punching his father, or Cartman riding a giant taco, or live-action children removing virtual reality headsets. All of those are spectacular. All of them are brilliant. But the truest image of South Park's trippiness is a tired man in an empty room, surrounded by the remnants of an idea that was nothing 48 hours ago and will be on television screens across the country in a few hours. And he doesn't know if it's good. He doesn't know if it matters. He just knows it's done, and tomorrow he has to do it again. That cycle, creation, exhaustion, doubt, reset, creation again, is the real trip. It's the trip that started in 1997, with two guys making paper cutouts move with stop-motion cameras. And it hasn't ended. It might never end. And every episode of South Park, whether it's a psychedelic masterpiece or a throwaway filler, is a document of that trip. An artifact of a consciousness in motion, generating reality 6 days at a time, never quite knowing what's real and what's just the exhaustion talking. I don't know. I don't think they know either. And I don't think we're supposed to know. I think that's the point. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.